The first thing I'm doing is I'm wetting the paper. I've already prepared some washes, some very dilute pink and some very dilute green. I'm actually painting on the very dilute pink to begin with, and I'm sort of putting this in the middle of the painting, and I'm painting wet on wet with my size 6 brush. And I'm just sort of painting it here and there, and now I'm painting in the very dilute green, wet into wet, trying to avoid where I put the pink, so I've left some gaps. As you saw there, I wiped my brush on the tissue so I can compare what my brush is doing and how wet it is. I'm putting a little bit more green at the bottom. Most of the green in this painting, or in the photograph, in the reference photograph, is at the bottom. So I'm using the size 6 brush to paint in some of the magenta. I'm still working wet on wet, but the paint's slightly thicker. I mean, when I say thicker, it's still very watery, but it's not as dilute as that very pale wash. And I'm just dropping the colour in. I've swapped now to my size 2 brush, and I'm just drizzling in this paint and just putting it here and there, just trying to get some inspiration from the reference photograph. What I'm doing now is I'm just tilting my sketchbook down a bit just to get the paints sort of blending a little bit, and I'm just picking up the excess liquid there at the bottom with some kitchen towel, really trying to be as careful as I can. And now I'm tilting it the other way. I don't necessarily want the green or the pink to mix entirely, but I just want them to sort of be blended and be quite soft. The paint now is slightly thicker, so I've actually swapped to a little bit more, a little separate palette area there. So it's slightly thicker. So I'm still painting on a damp surface, but it's dried off a little bit, and my paint is slightly thicker. So it's damp into damp. So you can see there, the background's very wet into wet, it's diffused. Now this is damp into damp, so the paint's kind of stays there. It's a really good exercise. And one of the really good things about this sketchbook series is there's not so much pressure. These shouldn't take too long. They're quite small in size, and you've got lots of times to practice something like this, wet into wet, damp into wet, damp into damp. You know, it gives you the confidence, because if it all goes wrong, you can either just have another go or even make some notes about what you did and just practice it. It really is all about the practice, and the feedback I've got from so many of you is about the fact, I know some of you who've shared pictures on Facebook of your paintings have said like you've had 2 or 3 goes, and I can see on the 3rd go, I can really see that practice makes such a difference. So really keep up the good work. It's fabulous to see, and thank you for sharing. And if you haven't shared already, give it a go. There's a good little community developing there. What I'm doing now is I'm adding some greens, damp into damp, with my size 2 brush. What I'm doing now is I'm just sprinkling a little bit of table salt onto the damp surface, and I'm going to let that dry, and hopefully it creates some nice sort of textured marks. So the painting has dried and it has got some lovely textures there. I'm going to be working wet on dry using my size 2 brush. I'm starting off with the same colour that I used at the end of the painting when I was working damp into damp. But because of watercolour painting, this will appear darker than the wash underneath, because watercolour does dry almost a tone lighter. So I'm just going to work now on the detail of these little pink wildflowers and just making the marks here and there. I've just added a tiny bit of green to that just to make the colour a little bit darker. Really take your time making these marks. Really have a look at that reference photograph. One of the secrets in drawing and painting is a lot of looking as well. It's not just about the marks, it's about the looking and the referencing. And I'm really I've just swapped now to my size 6 brush, because I felt that size 2 was sort of making the kind of same sort of marks, and I found the size 6 got a lovely point, but I was able to sort of press a little bit harder in places to get some different shapes of marks, because again, looking at that reference photograph, there's sort of different angles and different marks, and also some marks that are slightly lighter as well, so you might want to sort of dilute your brush a little bit in places and don't have the tonal value the same all the way through. What I really love about watercolour painting is just what I'm looking at. I hope what you can see now as well is that background is all fuzzy and soft because of the wet on wet and the damp into wet and damp into damp. Now I'm painting wet on dry, and it almost gives that depth, doesn't it? You've got those fuzzy kind of painting in the background and these more sort of in focus marks in the foreground, and it really does. It's amazing how it gives it depth, and I always try and use this in my painting to kind of, you know, you've got that sort of technique there, why not use it and keep it as simple as possible? And what's lovely is just using these two colours gives you so much control. Just going to paint some stems in now with my size 2 brush, just taking my time. When you do this, just take your time. I'm mixing up a little bit of the green with the pink to sort of create a really nice dark colour, and I'm just sort of, as you can see there, very carefully painting that up to the top, and as it gets to the top it gets a little bit thinner. And now I'm putting some of the foliage, some of the leaves, some of the stems towards the bottom here, mixing up a variety of colours, the green with touches of pink, and painting this wet on dry with my size 2 brush. Try to vary your strokes, they don't all look the same, and some are longer, some are shorter, so it looks more natural looking. I'm putting in some very pale pink stems here, and I want them, even though it's wet on dry, I want them to look like they're in the background, they're behind a little bit. It's quite effective. I'm putting some slightly paler marks here as well. I felt the ones I painted previously were just a little bit too dark, so I'm painting some paler marks there. So you've almost got the fuzzy marks behind, and you've got these paler tones and then the darker tones. It really creates lots of lovely depth in your painting. And I'm just painting again more dark. So if you want to, you can dry this in between times if you don't want your colours to bleed into one another. It gives you a little bit more control. But what a gorgeous colour it is, isn't it? The magenta and the pink. You create some lovely darks with this. I'm doing what I love to do, a little bit of spattering. It creates some lovely texture. If you look at that reference photograph with those tiny little marks, it's really effective. I'm just giving it a final few darks in the foreground here, sort of going between the pinks and the green and the pink. And now I'm putting some really, really tall, sort of thin stems in here. I'm trying to sort of really just create this really lovely atmospheric scene, just using these two colours, mainly with just 2 brushes as well. It's just such a lovely thing to do on your sketchbook. You don't have to worry. I know some of you have said you had it was tricky painting stems, so I'm actually using my cut up store card, plastic card, dipping it into the paint and then printing the marks onto the paper. I mean, it gives you varied effects, but I think it's quite a nice contrast to the softer marks that I got from the brushwork. So maybe give that a try. If you're not sure about it, have a little bit of a practice first of all. I'm mixing up a little bit more of pink just to get some bigger blobs for the final sort of marks in this little sketchbook painting. I'm removing my framing tape so it's got a nice little white border. I think it looks so effective. It really frames your work really, really well. I'm taking it off carefully because I don't want to tear my paper. But remember, if you're worried about that, blow dry your masking or framing tape beforehand. It softens the glue and it sort of helps, it prevents it from tearing your paper. I'm going to sign my little painting now, just so it's quite nice in your sketchbook to know the date and things like that. So there we are, finished. If you enjoyed this tutorial and would like to support the content that I create here on YouTube, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? You will get access to weekly exclusive tutorials and you can cancel anytime. And check out the details about the membership in the description. Thank you so much for watching. Happy painting. Bye for now.